By 4:38 inches the morning, every modern heating panel inside Mercy Ridge Hospital had gone dark. The new system had cost more than the old Creamery building was worth. It had touchscreens, sensors, backup modules, and a contract nobody in town could fully understand. But when the ice storm sealed the roads and snapped the power lines along County Route 6, all that expensive equipment sat silent while the temperature inside the East Wing kept falling. And across the service road, in a condemned brick creamery no one had used in 23 years, Ellis Boone was already standing beside a rusted boiler with a lantern in his hand. At 81, Ellis was the kind of old man people humored until he became inconvenient. Hospital board members called him a trespasser. The new facilities engineer called him a safety risk. Even his granddaughter, Clara, a night nurse in that same hospital, had begged him to stop sneaking into the old Maple Ridge Creamery to oil gauges, check valves, and wipe dust from pipes nobody believed mattered anymore. The county had marked the boiler for removal by Friday, but Ellis knew something the engineers did not. Behind the creamery wall was a capped steam line, installed during a winter nobody wanted to remember. And under a layer of grease in the old maintenance log was a note written the night his father's name was ruined. Before dawn, Ellis would have to choose between obeying the red condemnation tag or opening a sealed valve no one had touched since 1978. And the question was not whether the old boiler could still run. It was what truth would come out with the steam. If stories about forgotten people, old promises, and things the world was too quick to throw away mean something to you, consider subscribing. Because what happened next was not just about an old man and a rusted boiler. It was about the warmth the town forgot, and the truth waiting inside the pipes. The hospital board meeting was held inside the new recovery wing, under lights bright enough to make the fresh paint shine. At the front, renderings promised clean rooms, safe hallways, and smiling families. Across the service road, through the wide windows, the old Maple Ridge Creamery sat dark in the snow. Ellis Boone sat in the last row with his cap in his lap. His coat was worn thin at the elbows. His boots left wet marks on the polished floor. Between his hands was a folded paper map, creased soft from years of being opened and studied. Bryce Harlan from Bracket Systems clicked a remote. A photograph of the creamery boiler filled the screen. Rust streaked down the metal shell. A crack ran along the brick firebox. A red county warning tag hung from the valve wheel. "This is not a backup system," Bryce said. "It is a condemned pressure vessel with obsolete fittings, incomplete documentation, and unacceptable risk beside a medical facility." Several board members nodded. Marla Keene sat behind a folder marked Removal Order. Dale Brackett, the county inspector, kept one hand on a thick codebook. Bryce clicked again. Safety hazard, liability exposure, demolition timeline, unauthorized access. "The boiler room has also been entered repeatedly," Bryce said. "Despite locks, posted notices, and direct warnings. That creates another risk, human interference." Heads turned toward Ellis. Someone whispered, "He's been sneaking in again." Another voice said, "Old man still thinks he works there." A few people laughed. Clara Boone stood along the sidewall in her nurse's uniform, arms folded tight. She had just come off a night shift. The mark from her mask still crossed one cheek. She did not laugh, but when she looked at Ellis, he saw fear. Marla cleared her throat. "Mr. Boone, since this concerns your access to the property, the board will allow you 2 minutes before we vote." Ellis rose slowly and unfolded the map. "This is the original utility drawing from 1944, he said. "After the blizzard of '43, Mercy Ridge installed a steam tie from the creamery. It ran under the service road, into the old laundry basement, then up through the East Wing heat manifold." Bryce smiled. "With respect, Mr. Boone, no such line appears in the current infrastructure records. That's because your records start too late." A laugh moved through the chairs. Dale adjusted his glasses. "Even if such a line once existed, it would not be approved now. Not with a condemned boiler, not without inspection, certification, and county authorization." Ellis looked at him. "Was it inspected before it was condemned?" The room quieted for half a second. Bryce stepped forward. "The condemnation was based on visible degradation and incomplete documentation." "Incomplete documentation," Ellis repeated. Marla's pen stopped moving. Ellis tapped the map once. "You're tearing out the only thing in this town built for the kind of winter that makes new things fail." That was when the laughter came harder. A board member leaned back. Are we supposed to heat a hospital with ghosts and milk cans? Marla closed the folder. Mr. Boone, history is not a safety plan. Ellis folded the map. Neither is forgetting one. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then, Marla turned to the board. The motion is to remove the Maple Ridge Creamery boiler and associated condemned mechanical structures no later than Friday at noon. Any unauthorized entry before that date will be referred to the sheriff's office. The vote was unanimous. Clara closed her eyes. When the meeting broke, Clara came to him near the window. "Grandpa," she whispered, "you have to stop now." Ellis looked past her, toward the creamery. "They just put a deadline on the wrong thing," he said. Then he walked into the falling snow, crossed the service road, and unlocked the creamery door one more time. Inside, the air smelled of cold brick, old grease, and dust. Ellis set his lantern on the workbench, opened the drawer beneath the gauge cabinet, and pulled out the maintenance log his father had left behind. Near the back, under a line dated February 1978, Raymond Boone had written 7 words Ellis had never been able to forget. East Line must not be forgotten. Ellis touched the sentence. Then, somewhere deep inside the creamery wall, a pipe gave a soft metallic tick. Not dead, not yet. Long before Maple Ridge Creamery became a condemned building, it was the warmest place in Mercy Ridge. Ellis Boone first walked through its side door at 9 years old, carrying his father's lunch pail with both hands. The floor trembled. Belts turned above him, pipes knocked inside the walls. Men shouted over the hiss of steam, while milk trucks backed in before sunrise. To most boys, it would have been frightening. To Ellis, it felt alive. His father, Raymond Boone, worked the boiler room. He was not a large man, but inside that brick room he seemed larger than anyone else. He could hear a pump losing prime before the gauge moved. He could tell by the flame whether the draft was right. "Machines talk," Raymond told him. "Most men only listen after something breaks." By 14, Ellis could read a pressure gauge from across the room. By 16, he could clean a burner assembly without being told twice. By 20, he was working Saturday maintenance beside his father. Back then, the creamery was more than a factory. It was where farmers brought milk before daylight, and where children waited in pickups for fathers who smelled of steam and butterfat. The morning whistle told Mercy Ridge the day had started. The evening whistle told it the men were going home. And beneath the service road ran the East Steam Line. Raymond showed it to Ellis in the winter of 1962, after a storm froze the town so hard that the cemetery gates would not open. He took the boy into the basement and pointed to a pipe disappearing through a brick wall. "That goes to the hospital," he said. "Not for comfort, for when comfort is gone." Ellis asked why nobody talked about it. Raymond looked at him. "Because the best backup is the one fools forget until decent people need it." For years, Ellis thought of that line as another piece of old machinery. Useful, maybe, but ordinary. Then came February 1978. The cold that week had a cruel, dry edge. Trucks would not start. Windows iced from the inside. The creamery ran heavy because farmers were trying to move milk before the roads locked down. Management wanted every boiler hour they could get. Ellis was 23. Raymond was 56. On the night of the accident, Ellis was in the loading bay, repairing a frozen pump when the first sound came through the building. It was not an explosion at first. It was a deep metal groan, the kind that made old workers stop before young ones understood why. Then the whistle screamed. Steam rolled through the south corridor. Men ran. Someone shouted that the auxiliary valve had failed. Someone else yelled Raymond's name. By the time Ellis reached the boiler room, 3 men were on the floor near the service passage, burned and coughing. His father stood in the steam with both hands locked around a valve wheel, trying to bring pressure down before the line tore open. His eyebrows were singed. His face was gray. He looked at Ellis once. "Get them out," he said. So Ellis did. He dragged one man by the coat, another by the belt, and went back for the third with his lungs burning and his hands blistering through his gloves. When the fire crew arrived, Raymond was still inside, leaning against the brick wall beside the gauge cabinet. The next morning, the story had already changed. Management said Raymond had ignored a safety warning. The county report said he had failed to follow shutdown procedure. The newspaper used careful words that still cut deep: negligence, improper valve sequence, operator error. The creamery reopened within 10 days. Raymond Boone never worked there again. Mercy Ridge did not curse him openly. That would have been easier. Instead, the town lowered its voice. Men who had once asked his advice crossed the street. Farmers stopped waving from truck windows. At church, people shook his hand and looked past him. Ellis watched his father become the story people told when they wanted to warn young men what happened to pride. At night, Ellis heard Raymond in the kitchen, coughing in the dark with the maintenance log open in front of him. "What happened?" Ellis asked once. Raymond closed the book. "More than they wrote down," he said. That was all. For years, that answer made Ellis angry. Raymond had taught him that a bad sound in a machine meant you opened the cover and find the cause. But when the bad sound was a lie, Raymond let it keep running. The creamery changed owners. New managers painted over old stencils. The hospital expanded, and the east steam line disappeared from modern drawings. The boiler ran less each year, then not at all. By the time Maple Ridge closed, most people remembered Raymond Boone only as the man blamed for the accident. But Ellis kept going back. At first, he told himself he was looking for proof. A chart. A note. A page that would show the report was wrong. He searched cabinets, access panels, and spaces behind dead pipes. He found nothing that cleared Raymond completely. What he found was the line. Not in public records. Not in the hospital's new plans. But behind old plates, beneath painted-over markings, in the root of pipe hangers, still bolted into brick. The east line was still there. Raymond had not lied about that. Years later, when Raymond's heart began failing, Ellis sat beside him in a hospital room overlooking the creamery roof. The old boiler stack stood beyond the window like a black finger against the sky. Ellis leaned close, expecting at last to hear the full truth. His father did not give it to him. Raymond gripped his wrist with surprising strength. "Keep the heat line ready," he whispered. Ellis swallowed. "I'll clear your name." Raymond's eyes sharpened. "No. Keep the line ready. One day, they'll need what they buried." "What did they bury?" Raymond looked toward the window. For a moment, Ellis thought he would answer. But his father only said, "Don't let them forget twice." He died 3 days later. Ellis carried those words for 48 years. He carried them through the closing of the creamery, through broken locks and warning signs, through Clara's pleas and the town's jokes, through every Saturday morning when his knees ached and the boiler room felt colder than it used to. He told himself he was honoring his father, but deep down, there was one thing he had never admitted. He was also afraid to find the truth Raymond had not been brave enough to say. And now, with a removal order signed and Friday noon coming fast, Ellis understood that the promise had never been about keeping a machine. It had been about keeping a door open long enough for the past to speak. By daylight, Maple Ridge Creamery looked worse than it truly was. That was the problem with old buildings. They gave strangers only their weakest face. The cracked windows, the leaning gutters, the bricks darkened by weather, the boards nailed over side doors by men who had never heard the machinery run when the whole place was breathing. To the hospital board, the creamery was an eyesore beside a new medical wing. To the county inspector, it was a file waiting to be closed. To Bryce Harlan, it was obsolete infrastructure with no digital record and no approved function. But to Ellis Boone, it was a body. He knew where it had scars. He knew where it had been cut open and patched. He knew which floorboards flexed near the old separator room, which window rattled first before a hard north wind, and which pipe inside the east wall ticked when the temperature fell fast. The boiler room sat at the back of the building, behind a steel door painted the color of old cream. Most of the paint had peeled away in flakes. The warning signs were newer than everything else. Red, square, official, and loud. Condemned mechanical space. No unauthorized entry. Pressure vessel unsafe. Ellis had read them so many times they no longer felt like words. They felt like accusations. The boiler itself filled the room like a sleeping animal. Its curved shell was blackened in places and rust-brown in others. The brick firebox had cracked along the right side, though not as badly as Bryce's photograph made it look. 2 gauges sat above the inspection plate. One had a broken needle. The other still moved if tapped gently, not enough to trust, but enough to prove it had not surrendered. A red tag hung from the main valve wheel. Ellis did not touch that valve. Not yet. He set his lantern on the bench and moved through the room by habit. First, the feedwater line, then the draft door, then the lower drain. He checked the floor beneath each joint, not because he expected pressure, but because old systems revealed themselves in stains long before they failed in noise. There was a thin line of mineral dust under the east return pipe. He crouched slowly, one hand against his knee, and rubbed it between two fingers. Dry, old, not new enough to frighten him. He moved to the gauge cabinet and opened it with a small brass key he kept on the same ring as his house key. Inside were things nobody from the board had cared to inventory: a cracked sight glass wrapped in cloth, 2 valve handles, a coil of copper tubing, a graphite pencil worn nearly flat, and the black maintenance log his father had used in the last years before the accident. Ellis took the log out with both hands. The cover left a smudge of oil on his thumb. He had read the back pages hundreds of times, but never in a way that satisfied him. Raymond Boone's handwriting was tight and slanted, as if every sentence had been written while someone was waiting for him to finish. The 3rd of February, 1978 auxiliary valve, sticking under load. February 5 east, tie inspected, no visible rupture. February 8 pressure fluctuation after management override. February 9 east line must not be forgotten. That final line always stopped him. It was not written like a note to a mechanic. It was written like a warning to someone who would come later. Ellis turned back one page, then another, looking again for what he might have missed. His father had noted pressure changes, feedwater temperature, draft irregularities, but there were gaps, places where a full explanation should have been, only numbers remained. Places where a man like Raymond would have written cause, he had written only condition. Ellis had spent years hating those gaps. That morning, after the board's vote, they frightened him more than usual. Because something in the room had changed. It took him a moment to see it. The dust on the floor near the sealed maintenance cabinet had been disturbed. Not by his boots, not by mice. The mark was too straight for that. Someone had dragged something narrow across the floor, then tried to brush the dust back with the side of a shoe. Ellis stood very still. The sealed cabinet was built into the wall behind the old blowdown pipe. It was not the gauge cabinet he used every Saturday. It was deeper, older, and locked with a square steel plate that had not been opened since the county investigation after the accident. The plate still carried a wax seal, but the wax had a hairline crack through it. Ellis leaned close. For 23 years after the Creamery closed, nobody had cared enough about that cabinet to look twice at it. Now the hospital board had voted to remove the boiler, and suddenly the dust around the cabinet had been touched. That meant one of two things. Either someone from the county had inspected more than they admitted, or someone had come looking for what Raymond had left behind. Ellis looked down at the maintenance log. East line must not be forgotten. The words no longer felt like memory. They felt like instructions. He closed the book and slid it inside his coat. Then he took the folded 1944 utility map from his inner pocket and laid it across the workbench under the lantern light. The east steam line was there in faded blue ink. Creamery boiler room, service road, old laundry basement, east wing manifold, a line drawn by men who had expected future men to remember why it mattered. Ellis traced the route with one finger until it reached the hospital. Then he looked through the dirty window at the new recovery wing glowing across the road. They were going to tear out the boiler by Friday noon. They had no idea what they were cutting away. For the first time that morning, Ellis felt something colder than fear. Urgency. He folded the map, took the logbook, locked the gauge cabinet, and stood for a moment beside the old boiler. "I hear you," he whispered. The pipe in the wall ticked once more, soft and patient. By sunrise, Ellis Boone had made his decision. He would take the map to the hospital facilities office. He would show Bryce Harlan the line again, this time with Raymond's logbook in his hand. And if they laughed, he would make them look at the steel tag in the manhole beneath the service road. Because before anyone could save the old boiler, Ellis first had to prove that the thing everyone misunderstood was not just a machine. It was a warning, and warnings ignored long enough had a way of becoming disasters. Ellis Boone went back to Mercy Ridge Hospital before noon with the 1944 map under one arm and Raymond's maintenance log wrapped in a flour sack. He did not go through the main entrance. That was for visitors, flowers, and families trying to look less afraid than they were. Ellis went around to the loading dock, where the snow had been pushed into gray banks and the service doors opened into a corridor that smelled of bleach, cardboard, and warm plastic. The facilities office sat beside the electrical room. Inside, Bryce Harlan was standing over a laptop with two younger technicians. A digital floor plan glowed on the screen in clean blue lines. No stains, no erasures, no faded pencil marks, no history. Bryce looked up when Ellis entered. "Mr. Boone," he said, already tired. Ellis placed the old map on the desk and smoothed it flat with both hands. "You said the line wasn't in your records," Ellis said. "Here it is." The two technicians leaned in despite themselves. The faded blue route ran from Maple Ridge Creamery, under the service road, into the old laundry basement, and toward the east wing. Ellis tapped each point gently, as if touching a bruise. Bryce did not look impressed. "That drawing is 80 years old. So is the line. Or it was removed." "It wasn't." Bryce turned the laptop toward Ellis. "This is the current infrastructure model. Every active line, every abandoned conduit, every known utility tie. There is no steam connection from the creamery." Ellis looked at the glowing screen. "That model is wrong." One of the technicians gave a short laugh before catching himself. Bryce's face tightened. "You cannot walk into a hospital and declare our records wrong because you have a paper map and a memory." Ellis opened the maintenance log. February 5th, 1978. East tie inspected. No visible rupture. February 9th. East line must not be forgotten. Bryce glanced at the page, then away. "That does not make it usable." "I didn't say usable. I said real." "Mr. Boone, even if I accepted that an abandoned steam line exists, it would be untested, uncertified, and legally unusable, and the boiler feeding it is condemned." Ellis closed the logbook slowly. "Condemned from incomplete documentation." Bryce exhaled. "Condemned because it is old, damaged, and dangerous." "No," Ellis said. "Condemned because no one left here knows how to read it." The room went still. It was not a loud insult, but it landed harder than one. Bryce stepped back from the desk. "I think we're done." That was when Clara appeared in the doorway. She had heard enough to know it was bad. Her eyes went first to the map, then to the logbook, then to Ellis's face. "Grandpa," she said quietly, "come with me." Ellis did not move. Clara came closer and lowered her voice. "Please, not here." Bryce folded his arms. "Nurse Boone, I would appreciate it if you helped your grandfather understand that this is a restricted operational area." Clara's face flushed. "He understands more about operational areas than most people in this building." Ellis looked at her, surprised, but Clara was not finished. "And he also needs to understand that if he keeps pushing this, he could lose more than his pride." She took the logbook from the desk and pressed it against Ellis's chest. In the hallway, away from Bryce and the technicians, her worry finally broke open. "You think they're laughing because they're arrogant," she said. "Maybe some of them are. But I work upstairs, Grandpa. I know what's in those rooms. Stroke patients, old men on oxygen, women recovering from surgery, people who cannot just be moved because you believe in a pipe." Ellis held the logbook against his coat. "I don't believe in it. I know it. That doesn't make it safe." "No, but pretending it isn't there doesn't make them safe either." Clara looked away. For a moment, Ellis saw the little girl she had been, standing on a crate in his workshop, asking why every wrench had a different mouth. He had taught her patience then. Now she was trying to teach him fear. "I'm not ashamed of you," she said finally, "but I am scared of what you'll do to prove you're right." Those words followed him after she walked back toward the nurse's station. Ellis should have gone home. Instead, he crossed through the service corridor, went out the rear door, and followed the snow-packed edge of the road toward the old laundry wing. If Bryce would not look at the map, Ellis would show him something Steele could not deny. The access hatch was half buried near a concrete curb behind the hospital. Most people thought it was a storm drain. Ellis knew better. He brushed snow from the rim with his glove, revealing the faint outline of older bolts around the cover. He had just fit his father's square wrench into the first bolt when a voice called from behind him. "Step away from that." A hospital security guard came across the lot with one hand on his radio. He was young, broad-shouldered, and nervous enough to be dangerous. Ellis kept his hand on the wrench. "This hatch belongs to the old utility run. It belongs to hospital property. So does the mistake under it." The guard did not smile. "Sir, I need you to step back now." Through the glass of the east wing, Ellis saw Clara standing in the corridor with one hand over her mouth. That was what made him let go. Not the guard, not the radio, not the warning. Clara. By late afternoon, Marla Keene sent the notice by courier. It was printed on hospital letterhead and copied to the county inspector and sheriff's office. It stated that Ellis Boone was prohibited from entering Maple Ridge Creamery, hospital service areas, mechanical spaces, access hatches, utility corridors, or any property connected to the condemned boiler removal. Any further interference would be treated as trespassing and obstruction. Ellis read it at his kitchen table while the light faded from the windows. The old house was quiet except for the ticking wall clock and the wind pushing against the back door. The notice lay beside Raymond's logbook. The 1944 map lay beside that. 3 papers, 3 versions of the same town. One forgot, one warned, one threatened. Ellis sat there until dark. Then he took his father's square wrench from the drawer and laid it on the table. He did not pick it up yet. He only looked at it. Friday noon was coming. And if no one would open the records, Ellis would have to open the ground. Clara Boone did not sleep after her shift. She went home, took off her shoes, sat on the edge of her bed, and stared at the hospital notice folded on her kitchen table. Ellis had not shown it to her. Marla Keene had sent a copy to Clara because she was family, because she was staff, and because Mercy Ridge had a way of making concern feel like pressure. Any further interference would be treated as trespassing and obstruction. The words should have comforted her. They did not. By 9 that evening, sleet had started ticking against the windows. The weather report said the real storm would arrive after midnight, but the air already had that brittle feel Clara remembered from childhood, when Ellis would tell her to leave the tap dripping and keep extra blankets near the door. She tried to picture him at home. Then she pictured the square wrench. 10 minutes later, Clara was driving back toward the hospital. The service road behind Mercy Ridge had not been plowed again. Her tires crunched over the thin ice. Across the road, the creamery stood black against the whitening sky, its smokestack disappearing into sleet. At first, she did not see Ellis. Then a small lantern moved near the old laundry wing. Clara stopped the car so fast the back end slid a little. "Grandpa," she called, stepping into the cold. "Please tell me you are not doing what I think you're doing." Ellis stood beside the half-buried access hatch, his coat collar turned up, Raymond's square wrench in his gloved hand. "I'm not opening the boiler," he said. "That is not the line you think it is. I'm opening the ground. That doesn't make it better." He looked older in the lantern light, but not confused. That was what frightened her most. A confused man could be guided away. Ellis looked like a man walking toward something he had already accepted. Clara came closer and saw that he had cleared the snow from the hatch rim. 4 old bolts circled the cover. 2 had already been loosened. "If security finds you, they'll call the sheriff," she said. "I know. If Dale Brackett finds you, he'll have you charged. I know that too. And if there's pressure under there, there isn't. Not live pressure. You don't know that." Ellis held the wrench out to her, handle first. "No," she said. "I'm not asking you to help me break the law. That is exactly what you're asking. I'm asking you to see what they refuse to see." The words sat between them in the sleet. Clara should have walked away. Instead, she took the wrench. Together, they worked the last 2 bolts loose. Ellis lifted the cover only a few inches at first, letting the stale air breathe out. Nothing hissed. Nothing snapped. No hidden pressure burst into the night. Only a faint warmth rose from the dark. Clara felt it against her face and stopped moving. It was not heat exactly. It was too weak for that. More like the breath of an old room sealed under the earth. Ellis lowered the lantern. Beneath the hatch, a narrow utility shaft dropped 6 feet to a concrete channel. On the far side ran a pipe as wide as Clara's forearm, wrapped in ancient insulation and marked with bands of flaking blue paint. A metal tag hung from a rusted wire. Ellis angled the lantern until the letters showed. Eastline 1944. Clara forgot the cold for a moment. She crouched beside the opening, one hand on the rim. The tag was not a story. It was not grief. It was not an old man's pride. It was steel, stamped with letters by someone who had expected it to be found. Ellis did not say, "I told you." That made it worse. He only stood beside her, breathing slowly, as if he had been waiting years for someone else to see the same small piece of truth. Clara swallowed. "Why is it warm?" "Ground temperature," Ellis said. "Maybe a little residual from the hospital side. Some utility rooms leak more heat than people think. But the line is intact enough to hold air. If it had collapsed, we'd feel dead cold." Intact doesn't mean safe. No. Usable? Not yet. That answer surprised her. Ellis looked down into the hatch. A line can exist and still kill you if you treat it like a miracle. I'm not asking anybody to fire the boiler blind. I'm asking them to stop cutting before they know what they're cutting. Clara looked back toward the hospital. From where they stood, she could see the east wing windows glowing through the sleet. Behind those windows were the patients she had spent all night turning, warming, lifting, feeding ice chips to. Mrs. Abernathy in room 214, who cried when her hands got cold. Mr. Wilkes in 219, whose lungs tightened when the room temperature dropped too fast. A young mother recovering from surgery who kept asking if the storm would delay her husband. Those people were real. So was the tag. That was the terrible part. Clara pulled out her phone and opened a photo of the hospital's current basement layout. She had seen it often enough during evacuation drills. The old laundry basement was marked as storage. The east mechanical chase was shown as sealed. No steam tie. No creamery connection. But the shape of the wall on the modern plan did not match what she remembered from walking those lower corridors. There was a dead space. A long, narrow blank between storage and the east wing service shaft. She zoomed in. "Grandpa," she said slowly, "there's a space in the basement map." Ellis looked at her. "It's not labeled," she said. "I always thought it was just a wall thickness or an old chase they filled in." "Did they?" "I don't know." Saying that cost her more than she expected. Ellis understood. He did not reach for victory. He reached for the hatch cover. "Then we close this before someone sees it open," he said. "And tomorrow morning, you ask one question." "What question?" "Ask them why the current plan has a blank where my old map has a line." They bolted the cover back down together. By the time they finished, the sleet had turned harder. Ice clicked against the service road. Somewhere beyond the hospital, a transformer gave a distant blue flash and went dark. Clara looked toward the east wing again. For the first time, the glowing windows did not look as certain as they had before. Ellis picked up the lantern. "Storm's coming faster than they said," he murmured. Inside the hospital, the lights flickered once, then steadied. For now, the storm reached Mercy Ridge before midnight. It did not arrive like snow at first. It came as ice. Thin, clear, patient ice that coated the handrails, sealed car doors shut, and turned every branch along County Route 6 into glass. By 1 in the morning, the road crews had stopped pretending they could keep up. By 2, the first power line snapped outside the old feed store and threw a blue flash across the empty street. Inside Mercy Ridge Hospital, the new recovery wing hummed on backup power. For a while, that was enough. The lights dimmed, but stayed on. Nurses moved from room to room with flashlights clipped to their pockets. The emergency generator coughed, caught, and settled into a steady growl beneath the building. Then the heating panels in the east wing began to blink. Bryce Harlan was called in at 3:12. He arrived wearing a parka over his dress shirt, his hair wet with freezing rain. In the mechanical room, 2 technicians were already standing in front of the control panel, watching alerts stack across the screen. Auxiliary heat fault. Sensor communication loss. Pump loop freeze protection active. Bryce pulled off his gloves and started working fast. He reset one module, bypassed another, checked the digital manifold readings, and called the remote service line twice before the signal dropped. "Give it a minute," he said. But the hospital did not have a minute. On the second floor, Clara Boone felt the change before the thermometer confirmed it. The air near the windows lost its softness. Metal bed rails turned cold under her hands. Mrs. Abernathy in room 214 began to shiver even under 2 blankets. "Is the heat coming back?" the old woman asked. Clara smiled because nurses learned to give calm before they had answers. "They're working on it." In room 219, Mr. Wilkes's breathing tightened. A young mother recovering from surgery asked if her baby could be moved away from the window. Down the hall, another nurse stuffed towels along the bottom of a door where cold air was sliding in from a service stairwell. By 4:05, the east wing temperature had dropped 6 degrees. Marla Keene stood in the corridor with a phone in one hand and a radio in the other. Her face had lost the clean confidence it wore at board meetings. "Can we transfer them to the west wing?" she asked. "Not all of them," Clara said. "Not safely. Not in this storm." Bryce came up from the mechanical room with a tablet under his arm. "The backup heat loop is not responding," he said. "The freeze protection sequence locked part of the system down." Marla stared at him. Unlock it. I'm trying. Then try faster. The words were sharp, but fear had made them sharp. Everyone could hear the storm hitting the windows. Everyone knew ambulances would not come easily. Everyone knew fragile people could turn critical in less time than a committee needed to approve a solution. Clara looked toward the east stairwell. In her mind, she saw the access hatch opening under the sleet, the blue paint on the old pipe, the steel tag stamped East Line 1944. She heard Ellis's voice. Ask them why the current plan has a blank where my old map has a line. Clara pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over his name for only 1 second. Ellis answered before the second ring. The East Wing? He asked. Clara closed her eyes. How did you know? Because that's where the old line went. She looked down the corridor at the patients' doors, each one holding a person who had trusted the building around them to keep doing what buildings were supposed to do. Can it help? She asked. There was a pause. Not hesitation. Calculation. Maybe, Ellis said, but not from the hospital side. Where? The Creamery. Clara turned away from Marla and lowered her voice. Grandpa, they'll have you arrested. If they had listened yesterday, they could arrest me warm. 10 minutes later, Ellis Boone crossed the service road with his lantern in one hand and Raymond's square wrench in the other. The storm pushed at him hard enough to make him lean into it. Ice cracked under his boots. The Creamery door resisted, frozen at the bottom, until Clara kicked snow away from the threshold and helped him pull it open. Bryce followed them in. So did Marla, though she stayed near the doorway, as if the building itself might accuse her. Inside the boiler room, Ellis did not rush. That frightened Bryce more than panic would have. Ellis checked the feedwater line first, then the draft, then the lower drain. He tapped one gauge, ignored it, and checked the second with his lantern close. He ran his hand near the east, return pipe without touching it. Can it run? Clara asked. Ellis looked at the boiler a long moment. Yes. The word changed the room. Bryce stepped forward. That boiler is condemned. I know. It has no active certification. I know. It could rupture. If opened wrong. Marla's voice shook. Opened? Ellis pointed toward the red-tagged valve wheel, then to a smaller sealed valve behind the blowdown pipe. Most people would not have noticed it. The wheel was black with age, and across it ran a brittle strip of old county wax. That valve feeds the East Line, he said. Bryce moved closer, reading the faded marking on the pipe. East Tie. His face went still. Ellis did not look at him with triumph. He looked tired. That seal has been there since 1978, he said. The report said it was closed because the line failed. Bryce swallowed. And you think the report was wrong? Ellis looked toward the hospital windows glowing weakly through the storm. I think people are getting cold because somebody wanted it forgotten. The boiler room seemed to shrink around them. Outside, the hospital lights flickered once. This time, they did not fully steady. Ellis set Raymond's wrench on the workbench. If we open that valve, he said, we stop arguing about whether the past matters. He looked at Clara, then Bryce, then Marla, and we find out if it still works. The old boiler room did not become heroic when Ellis Boone said it could run. It became dangerous. That was what everyone felt first. The storm hammered the Creamery windows. Ice clicked against the broken panes. Across the service road, Mercy Ridge Hospital glowed weakly through the dark, its east wing lights flickering in a rhythm nobody liked. Ellis moved as if the room had rules only he could see. He checked the feedwater valve, then the draft door, then the lower drain. He wiped frost from a pipe marking with his sleeve. He did not touch the sealed valve yet. He did not even reach for it. Bryce Harlan watched every movement. For the first time since Ellis had met him, the young engineer was not smiling. You cannot just bring pressure up in a condemned vessel, Bryce said. I know. You cannot feed an abandoned line without testing it. I know that too. Then why are we standing here? Ellis looked toward the hospital. Because the people freezing over there don't care what word the county stamped on the tag. Before Bryce could answer, headlights swept across the Creamery wall. Dale Brackett came in with freezing rain on his coat and anger already in his face. A deputy followed him, one hand near his belt, not threatening, but present enough to make the room smaller. Dale took one look at the boiler, then at the red-tagged valve. No one touches that, he said. Marla Keene stepped forward quickly. Dale, the east wing is losing heat. We may need to consider emergency. No, Dale said. You do not create one emergency to solve another. That boiler is condemned. That valve is sealed. If it ruptures, if that line fails, if steam gets into a wall cavity or patient area, this hospital will not just lose heat, it will lose lives. The words landed hard because they were not foolish. Even Ellis did not argue with them. Clara looked at her grandfather. Is he wrong? Ellis took a slow breath. No. That answer shook her more than denial would have. Dale pointed toward the door. Then we are done. No, Ellis said. We are finally being honest. He walked to the workbench, picked up a pencil, and drew 3 quick lines on the back of an old envelope. Boiler. East tie. Hospital manifold. If the boiler comes up too fast, she can rupture. If the valve opens too wide, the line can hammer. If the hospital side is blocked, pressure comes back at us. Any one of those things can hurt people. Bryce stared at the rough drawing. Ellis tapped the pencil once. That is why you don't open it like a door. You warm it. You listen. You vent. You let the line tell you where it's weak before you ask it to carry anything. The deputy shifted, uncertain now. Marla's phone buzzed again. She looked down and went pale. East wing is down another 2 degrees, she said. They're moving blankets from maternity. Clara closed her eyes for 1 second, then opened them. Dale, she said. I have patients who cannot wait for a roads department truck, a portable heater delivery, or a board vote. I am not asking you to ignore safety. I am asking you to help us decide what the safest dangerous option is. Dale looked at her as if she had betrayed him by making sense. Bryce turned back to the pipe markings. His tablet was open now. The accident report pulled up beside a photo he had taken of the old pressure chart mounted near the boiler. Wait, he said. No one moved. Bryce zoomed in on the report. Then he looked at the wall chart. Then back to the report. This sequence is different. Ellis looked up. Bryce pointed to the faded chart. The 1978 report says the auxiliary valve was closed before pressure dropped. But this chart shows the east tie had to be vented first in a cold start condition. Dale frowned. That chart is obsolete. Maybe, Bryce said, his voice lower now. But if this chart was the operating procedure, then the accident report describes the wrong sequence. The room changed again. Not warmer, not safer, but deeper. Marla stared at the sealed valve as if it had become less like equipment and more like a witness. Ellis did not look surprised. He looked wounded. My father said they wrote it wrong, he said. Dale's jaw tightened. A 50-year-old dispute does not authorize us to break a county seal. No, Bryce said quietly. But if the seal was placed based on a wrong report, then we may be protecting the wrong thing. Outside, the hospital lights flickered again. This time, part of the east wing went dark for 3 full seconds before backup power caught. Clara's radio cracked. Second floor to Nurse Boone. Room 219 is having breathing difficulty. We need warmer air now. Clara gripped the radio so tightly her knuckles whitened. Ellis looked at Dale. You can arrest me after. Dale said nothing. Bryce moved toward the sealed maintenance cabinet beside the blowdown pipe. If we do anything, he said, we need the original valve chart. Not the wall copy. Not the report. The original. Ellis turned toward the cabinet. The wax seal across its plate was already cracked. For the first time, Dale Brackett saw it too, and nobody in the boiler room asked why. Dale Brackett was the one who broke the wax seal. He did it slowly, with the deputy watching, Marla holding her phone, Clara listening to the radio, and Bryce standing beside him with a flashlight aimed at the steel cabinet door. Nobody spoke. The sound was small when the wax split, barely more than a dry crack. But to Ellis Boone, it sounded like a grave opening. Dale removed the square plate and pulled the cabinet door loose. Inside were 3 things. A rolled valve chart tied with brittle string, a brown envelope marked Accident File February 1978, and Raymond Boone's old brass pressure key, the one Ellis thought had been lost the night his father was taken from the Creamery. Ellis reached for the key first. His hand stopped halfway, Clara noticed. She took it gently and placed it in his palm. Bryce unrolled the chart across the workbench. The paper fought to curl back on itself. So Marla held one corner, Dale held another, and Ellis put Raymond's key on the third. The chart was not the same as the one on the wall. It showed one extra step. Before feeding steam into the east tie, the auxiliary relief line had to be opened halfway, held for 90 seconds, then closed only after the return pipe warmed. If skipped, cold pressure could slam back through the valve and rupture the chamber. Bryce looked down at the official accident report on his tablet. "That step is missing," he said. Dale pulled the brown envelope open. Inside were carbon copies, handwritten notes, and a page with Raymond's signature at the bottom. But the page number did not match. Someone had replaced page 4 of the final report with a cleaner version. The original page was folded behind it. Bryce read aloud, his voice lower with every sentence. Management had delayed maintenance on the auxiliary relief line for 6 months. A bypass order had been issued during peak production. A supervisor had instructed operators to keep the boiler under load despite pressure fluctuations. The cold start sequence had been changed without county approval. Raymond Boone had written a warning 3 days before the accident. East tie unsafe unless relief line is serviced. Ellis gripped the bench. For 48 years, he had imagined a clean truth waiting somewhere. His father innocent. The company guilty. The report false. The town wrong. Some of that was true, but not all. Dale unfolded the signed page. Raymond had not signed the false sequence. He had not confessed to operator error, but he had signed a statement saying the boiler crew accepted shared procedural responsibility so the company pension pool would not be frozen during litigation. Marla looked up. Why would he sign that? Ellis already knew before Dale answered. Because 5 injured workers had families. Because the Creamery had threatened to close the pension fund if the accident became a criminal matter. Because men with mortgages and children had begged Raymond not to make the company burn everything down on the way out. Because fear could make a decent man choose a smaller lie and call it protection. Clara touched Ellis's arm. "Grandpa." He pulled away, not harshly, but because kindness would have broken him. "All these years," he said, "I thought he was just waiting for me to clear him." Bryce looked at the chart, then at the hospital through the window. Maybe he was waiting for someone to use the part he saved. Those words struck Ellis harder than the report. He looked again at Raymond's handwriting. Not perfect, not brave in the way sons want fathers to be brave, but not careless, not guilty of what Mercy Ridge had made him carry. A deeper truth sat there, uglier and more human. Raymond Boone had been framed for the accident. Raymond Boone had also signed a page that helped bury the full story. Both things were true, and because of that lie, 3 things had happened. The injured workers never received the full compensation they were owed. The hospital forgot a heat line built to protect its weakest patients. And Ellis had spent most of his life defending a father he had not fully understood. Clara's radio cracked again. "Room 219 needs heat now. We're moving him, but he's not tolerating it. The past could not be repaired in that room. Not yet. The living still had first claim." Bryce put both hands on the original valve chart. "This sequence can work," he said, "but only if we follow it exactly." Dale stared at him. "You are willing to put your name on that?" Bryce swallowed. Then he looked at Ellis. "No," he said. "I'm willing to put my name beside his." Ellis picked up Raymond's pressure key. For a moment, he saw his father as he had been in the boiler room. Not clean, not ruined, just a man trapped between danger and duty. Then Ellis turned to the sealed valve. "Auxiliary relief halfway," he said. Bryce moved to the side gauge. Clara stood at the door, radio in hand, eyes fixed on the hospital. Dale did not give permission, but he did step out of Ellis's way. Ellis fitted Raymond's key into the old lock nut. The metal resisted, then moved. A low sound passed through the pipe. Not a scream, not a rupture. A breath. Ellis held the valve steady for 90 seconds, while Bryce counted aloud and Clara whispered updates from the east wing. At 90, Ellis turned the wheel another quarter. The pipe warmed under his hand. Across the service road, somewhere inside Mercy Ridge Hospital, an old line remembered its purpose. The first warmth did not come like a miracle. It came as a tremor in the pipe. Ellis felt it through his palm before anyone saw proof. A low vibration moved from the boiler wall, through the east tie, under the frozen service road, and toward Mercy Ridge Hospital. Bryce stood beside the gauge, counting pressure under his breath. Dale watched the sealed valve as if it might still betray them. Marla kept her phone pressed to one ear. Clara listened to the radio. For 30 seconds, nothing changed. Then a nurse from the second floor broke through the static. "East wing supply vent is warming." Clara closed her eyes. Not relief yet. Not celebration. Just one breath she had been holding for too long. Ellis kept his hand steady on the valve wheel. "Do not rush it," he said. Bryce nodded. Pressure holding. Across the road, Mercy Ridge Hospital began to remember heat. In room 214, Mrs. Abernathy stopped shivering hard enough for the bedrail to rattle. In room 219, Mr. Wilkes's breathing eased after Clara's fellow nurse moved warm air toward the doorway with a portable fan. The young mother by the window pulled her blanket tighter and began to cry quietly, not because she was cold now, but because she was no longer becoming colder. No one in those rooms knew Raymond Boone's name. No one knew about the missing page, the changed valve sequence, or the wax seal that had cracked before anyone admitted it mattered. They only knew the air had softened, and sometimes that was enough to keep a person alive. Back in the boiler room, Marla Keene lowered her phone. Her face should have shown gratitude. Instead, it showed fear. "We need to document everything," she said. "Every action, every person present, every deviation from protocol." Dale Brackett nodded too quickly. "No public statement until counsel reviews the file." Ellis looked at them and almost laughed, not because anything was funny, because even with heat moving through the line, they were still reaching first for paper. Bryce heard it too. Something in his face changed. "No," he said. Marla turned. "Excuse me?" Bryce set his tablet on the workbench and placed the original valve chart beside it. "I will write the technical statement tonight," he said. "Not after counsel cleans it. Not after the board decides what wording protects the hospital. Tonight." Dale frowned. "You should be careful." "I am being careful." Bryce pointed to the chart. This procedure was removed from the official report. The report described the wrong sequence. The seal was placed on incomplete or altered documentation. And Mr. Boone warned us before removal. The room went quiet. It was not an apology. It was better than one. It was a man putting his name where his pride had stood. Marla looked toward the hospital windows. For a moment, the board chair was gone, and Clara saw only a tired woman realizing that a clean building could still be built on a dirty record. "What do you want?" Marla asked Ellis. Ellis could have said many things. He could have asked for Raymond's name cleared by morning. He could have asked for the removal order torn up. He could have demanded every person who laughed at him stand in that room and admit they had been wrong. Instead, he looked at the Brown accident file. "Open the whole thing," he said. "Not just for my father. For the men who were burned. For the families who took less than they were owed. For the hospital patients who almost froze because somebody buried a line instead of fixing a lie." Marla did not answer right away. Then she nodded once. Dale removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "If the county file was altered, there has to be an independent audit." "There will be," Marla said. Clara stepped closer to Ellis, but waited until the others turned back to the gauges. "You were right," she whispered. Ellis watched the pressure needle move, slow and steady. Not all the way. She understood. He had wanted a clean father, a clean villain, a clean ending. What he had found was harder and maybe more useful. Clara touched his sleeve. "You still kept the line ready." Ellis looked at her then. For the first time that night, his face softened. "So did he," Ellis said. By dawn, the storm had not stopped, but the east wing was warm enough to hold. The sheriff never arrested Ellis. The deputy stayed to help carry blankets. Bryce drafted his statement on the workbench beside Raymond's logbook. Dale photographed the cabinet, the broken wax seal, and every page in the accident file. Marla called an emergency board session for noon. This time, it would not be about removing the boiler. It would be about opening the records. And as Mercy Ridge woke under a coat of ice, the town began to hear a different story about the old creamery. Not a perfect story, a true one. By spring, the Maple Ridge Creamery boiler was gone. Not stolen by collectors, not polished for a museum, not left standing as a monument people could point to when they wanted an easy story about an old man who had been right. It was taken apart piece by piece under daylight. Ellis Boone stood beside Clara on the morning the crew removed the outer shell. The brick firebox came down first. Then the old fittings, then the cracked gauge glass, the feedwater assembly, and the section of pipe that had once led into the east tie. Bryce Harlan supervised the work. This time, he did not speak like a man trying to win a room. He spoke carefully, with a notebook in his hand and grease on one cuff, asking Ellis questions before giving orders. "Was this the original drain?" "No," Ellis said. "That one was replaced after the freeze of '69. Bryce wrote it down. The audit had taken 3 months. It confirmed what the night of the storm had already shown. The 1,978 accident report had been altered. Page 4 had been replaced. The cold start sequence had been removed. The auxiliary relief line had been neglected long before Raymond Boone stood in that room with steam in his face. Raymond's name was corrected in the county record. Not cleaned, corrected. That mattered to Ellis. He refused to let Marla Keene's new public statement turn his father into a saint. Raymond had warned them. Raymond had saved men. Raymond had also signed a page that helped bury part of the truth, because he was afraid other workers would lose their pensions. Mercy Ridge learned to say all of it. The injured workers' families were contacted. Some were gone. Some had moved away. Some answered with silence at first, because old wounds do not open politely just because a hospital finally finds courage. But the board created a compensation review fund, and Bryce's technical statement became part of the public file. Dale Brackett signed the county correction himself. He did not apologize loudly. He came to Ellis one afternoon, stood at the edge of the creamery floor, and said, "The seal should never have stood on a false report." Ellis looked at him for a long time. Then he nodded. It was enough. The boiler could not stay. That was another truth, and Ellis did not fight it. The shell was too tired. The fittings were too old. The metal had given Mercy Ridge one last night, and asking all there id, and asking more from it would have turned gratitude into foolishness. So they saved what could still serve. The original valve chart was sealed in a training binder. Raymond's maintenance log was copied page by page. The pressure key went into Clara's desk drawer at the hospital, not as decoration, but as a reminder. The cracked gauge was mounted in the mechanical classroom beneath a plain label. Maple Ridge, emergency heat line, used during ice storm February. Study the past before you cut it out. Clara wrote the first rural emergency heat course herself. She did not make it sentimental. She made it useful. How to read old infrastructure drawings. How to verify abandoned lines before demolition. How to recognize when digital records start too late. How to ask retired mechanics, boilermen, millwrights, farmers, and maintenance workers what a building used to know. Bryce taught beside her once a month. At first, he stood stiffly in front of the class. Then Ellis interrupted him twice, corrected a diagram, and made 3 young technicians laugh by asking whether any of them had ever listened to a pipe before blaming a sensor. After that, Bryce loosened. He learned. So did they. By the next winter, Mercy Ridge Hospital had portable heat units, updated emergency drawings, inspected backup lines, and one rule printed in red at the top of every mechanical response plan: no system is modern if it cannot remember what came before it. Ellis still walked past the creamery site on Saturdays. There was no boiler room anymore. Only a cleared foundation, a capped line, and a small metal cover set into the ground where the east tie had been properly marked at last. One cold morning, Clara found him there with Raymond's old square wrench in his hand. "You keeping that?" she asked. Ellis turned it over once. For most of his life, the wrench had felt like proof. Then it had felt like burden. Now it felt like something simpler. A tool. He handed it to her. "You'll know when to use it," he said. Clara took it with both hands. Across the road, Mercy Ridge Hospital glowed in the early dark. Warm light filled the east wing windows. Inside, patients slept under blankets they did not have to clutch against the cold. The old boiler was gone. The steam was gone. But the line had not been forgotten. And this time, neither had the truth.